This podcast includes discussion of rape and sexual assault, abuse, murder, and other criminal behavior. Listener discretion is advised. Kim Salazar had not been able to reach her mom all weekend.
I couldn't get a hold of her, Doc couldn't get a hold of her, and then the next day, we all always talked every day.
Kim arrived to work at Royal Studio on the morning of Monday, August 12th, 1985, hoping to see Joyce there.
She wasn't late for work, she didn't miss work, ever.
She called her husband, Randy.
And she told me that her mom didn't make it, that she didn't go to work, and she'd been trying to call her, and there was no answer. And so I told Kim, I says, maybe we should check off the window over again. I says, you know what, let's not panic.
Kim phoned the State Line, the hotel casino where Joyce liked to stay on her occasional outings to West Wendover, Nevada. Her mom wasn't there either. So, Kim next called South Ogden police.
Kim explained to them, but they already knew about the threat that she had had with the rape case and what was going on with Doug Lovell.
Near as Kim could tell, her mother had last been seen late on the prior Saturday night in her sister Dorothy's driveway.
They wanted to know if it had been 24 hours she'd been missing. And heck, nobody knew when 24 hours started.
By the next day, when there still wasn't anything, I begged them, just meet me over there, go in and see what's wrong, And so they met me over there, but they made me go in. They didn't go in first.
Kim wriggled into her mother's apartment around noon on Tuesday, August 13th, through a side window she knew did not latch tight. Then she unlocked the door, allowing her husband and a South Ogden officer inside.
Everything was clean just like she kept it. It was always spotless.
No sign of a struggle.
Our apartment was always tidy.
Everything in the kitchen appeared as usual.
She had one of those automatic timers where the coffee had kicked on and made coffee, and the coffee pot was full.
They went into Joyce's bedroom.
All her jewelry and everything was on her dresser, so it didn't look like anybody came in and robbed her. Everything looked just like normal, just like Joyce would keep it.
Almost.
The bed was made.
A single pillow sat at the top of the bed. It was a minor thing, but Joyce's bed usually had 2 pillows.
I know Joyce always used to fall asleep with the TV on.
That TV was right where it was supposed to be.
Her toothbrush, her cosmetics, all that stuff was in the bathroom.
The pink dress Joyce had worn to the officers' club the prior Saturday night sat draped over the back of a chair.
Obviously, she came home, set the coffee pot, and she had every intention of getting up and starting out her day. And just never got to start it.
Kim looked in her mom's closet. Joyce had so many outfits it was impossible to tell if any of them were missing. But she did notice something else.
I found a washcloth down between the dresser and the door, and it was dried up and crumpled, like it had fallen down between.
Detective Sergeant Brad Birch arrived at Joyce's apartment that same afternoon to perform a more thorough search. He stripped Joyce's bed, discovering the sheets and the pillow sham didn't match. He examined the washcloth. It was crusty, as happens when water slowly evaporates out of cotton. He smoothed it out. The front face had alternating stripes of pink, brown, green, and gray. The back was tan, with several rust-colored stains. Dried blood. This is Cold, Season 2, Episode 4. She's Gone, Buddy. From KSL Podcasts, I'm Dave Cawley. We'll be right back. Word soon reached Clearfield Police Detective Bill Holthouse, the lead investigator in the rape case, of his victim's disappearance.
Yeah, this is not a pleasant time. She vanished South Ogden let me know that.
At a pretrial conference on August 15th, 2 days after the search of the apartment and 5 days before the trial was supposed to begin, the Davis County Attorney's Office asked Judge Rodney Page for a continuance.
We were convinced that bad things had happened. There's no doubt in our mind. Joyce was not the kind to get up and walk away.
Judge Page gave the state a month, at the end of which he would either schedule a new trial or dismiss the charges.
I don't think it really even entered our minds to dismiss, unless it was to dismiss to try to develop more evidence.
That's Brian Namba, the prosecutor. He and Bill agreed Doug Lovell was likely responsible.
I was sure that he was involved when she was gone.
But was Joyce actually dead? And if so, how had he done it?
At the time, I didn't think he was, frankly, dumb enough to do it himself.
They had no body, no proof a crime had occurred, no corpus delicti. South Ogden police went and questioned Doug and his wife Rhonda. They claimed to have been at a party the night of Joyce's disappearance. There were witnesses, they said.
There was an assumption at the time that maybe he paid somebody to get rid of Joyce.
Brian told Bill they were pushing ahead with the rape case, even if Joyce did not resurface.
We were pretty resolute because we believed that he was responsible.
Brian told me dropping the prosecution would have only rewarded Doug.
Once your train's rolling as fast as it was going for us, well, I don't think we really had much to lose.
Except a possible acquittal. Brian had to weigh that risk against letting Doug walk.
To take him to trial without a body was a decision that wasn't made lightly. We re-looked everything before Brian made a decision to go to trial on that.
He could be a Josh Powell, easily. And so then he gets away scot-free from everything, which is his objective. So you don't want to give him what he's trying to do.
Brian told Bill they needed more. He needed to go back to the Pier 3, the club where Joyce had dined the night of the rape, and find anyone else who might have seen Doug there. Susan Urich had not seen or heard from Doug Lovell, the man who had sent her unsolicited roses for 2 straight weeks, since he had come into the credit union where she worked in April of '85. He'd been in trouble then, due to police having impounded his Mazda, a car for which Susan had arranged financing.
And I remember one time talking to him about the vehicle being, they wouldn't release it to us as about it being a stolen vehicle. And he brushed it off like it was no big deal that part was going to get straightened out.
Now, in August, Doug returned. Susan didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. No debilitating back injury, for instance.
He'd wait out in the lobby and then walk over and talk to me, and at any time, never did I notice that he was having any health problems or anything like that.
When last they had spoken, Doug had told Susan he had separated from his wife Rhonda. And while separated, he had had a one-night stand with a woman who had then accused him of rape. Here, 5 months later, she asked how it was going.
Well, he said that him and Rhonda got back together, that they were doing really well, and that he figured that this whole thing with the rape thing was going to be settled.
So too, he said, was the mix-up over the Mazda. It would all be taken care of.
So I wasn't any more worried about the loan or what was going on with it at all.
Rob Olson often took walks along the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains to the east of his home in the Uinta Highlands area of Weber County, Utah. He'd walk the winding roads of his neighborhood up to the Forest Service boundary, then ascend dusty trails to the shoreline of ancient Lake Bonneville. From there, he could see the remnant of that inland sea, the Great Salt Lake. His typical route took him past a water tank embedded into the mountainside on the north wall of Spring Creek Canyon. On just such a walk on Saturday, August 17, 1985, he noticed something unusual there. A white Chevy Nova, parked behind the water tank. There was no obvious reason for the car to be there. A city work truck, maybe, but a little coupe? No. Rob had seen that same car there once before, the prior Sunday, parked in the exact same spot. The next evening, on Sunday, August 18th, he caught a story on the TV news about the disappearance of Joyce Yost. Joyce's son-in-law, Randy Salazar, saw it too.
They did a missing report thing. They put it on TV. I think it was on every channel. They gave her license plate number.
The news mentioned police were searching for Joyce's car, a white two-door Chevy Nova.
People were reporting seeing her car all over the place.
Realization struck Rob Olson. He phoned South Ogden Police just after 6 p.m. A group of officers rushed up the hill to the water tank. They included Rob Carpenter and Mel Hackworth, the same officers who had taken Joyce's report on the night of the rape. A dispatcher also called Sergeant Brad Birch and the on-call detective, Terry Carpenter.
We knew that it was Joyce's car and hoped to find anything that would lead us to what had happened to her.
Kim and Randy Salazar had themselves been calling South Ogden Police multiple times a day.
Trying to get updates and see if they had learned anything or, if they'd found the car, if they'd found her.
They called again after seeing that news report.
I called South Ogden Police Department to ask if they had found anything out on Kim's mom, and the lady answered like this. Just what she answered and said, "I'm glad you called me back."
I have to acknowledge a discrepancy here. Randy and Kim each remember being the one on the phone.
I think she thought she picked up the call she had on hold with one of the detectives, but she picked up the wrong line and it was me calling in.
But aside from this, their recollections are consistent.
And I said, is there something going on with the Joyce Yost case? She said, they found her car by the water towers.
She said that the car has been found or something to that effect.
They were stunned.
And then I told her, well, can we go up there? And then she asked who I was, and I said, this is Randy Salazar. Oh.
Then she realized it was me. She was like, oh my God. She just thought she was going to be in so much trouble.
The dispatcher had mistaken Kim, or possibly Randy, for one of the detectives.
She goes, you don't want to go up there. Please do not go up there.
Well, of course, then you're wondering, well, where is she? Why wasn't she with the car?
We had some other friends with us that were over to the house that day. And one of the friends told her, maybe somebody stole the car. Kim said, no, nobody stole the car.
Up on the hill, Officer Stephen Wallerstein was checking out the car in the fading daylight. Both doors were unlocked and both windows were rolled down. Several cigarette butts were in the ashtray. Yes, cars used to come with ashtrays. And a bath towel sat wadded up on the driver's seat. An empty plastic bag appeared to be stuffed between the driver's seat and the driver's side door. Wallerstein saw something on the floor, behind the passenger seat. A 1-pint mason jar containing a thick white liquid. The lid wasn't secure, and much of the goo had oozed out onto the carpet, where it had begun to develop a crust. It looked like, and probably was, paint. The water tank sat on a patch of unincorporated land, outside the boundaries of South Ogden. The Weber County Sheriff's Office had jurisdiction. A couple of deputies arrived and told their South Ogden colleagues the area around the water tank was a magnet for teen delinquents who liked to get drunk there. Proof of that was scattered all about: broken bottles and smashed cans. Brad Birch took notice of 2 particular Budweiser cans sitting near the car. He took them, as well as the plastic bag from inside the car, as possible evidence. The Nova's gas tank was more than half full, but Detective Terry Carpenter told me something important was missing.
There were no keys with it.
The police popped the Nova's hood and found a spare key hidden in the engine bay. As the sun set, they drove the Nova down the dirt path from the water tank to the pavement, and then to a service station.
I actually took it to my garage, my father's garage.
Terry moonlighted as a mechanic.
We didn't find a speck of blood. There was nothing in that car that we could tie it to.
All Joyce's loved ones could do was wait.
We all knew. We all knew that it wasn't good.
Brad returned to the water tank at first light the next morning with a man named Jim Gaskill. He was the preeminent local expert on forensic science, having helped establish Utah's first crime lab a decade earlier. They brought search dogs, as well as items bearing Joyce's scent. The dogs sniffed around the water tank, but came up with nothing. Next, Brad and Jim went back to the service station to take a closer look at Joyce's car. They lifted a few fingerprints. Then they did the same at Joyce's apartment. Unfortunately, none of the evidence seemed to indicate what had happened to her.
We met him over at the South Ogden Police Station.
Kim interrogated the detectives about her mom's car.
Was the seat far enough for my mom, or was it far enough for a man? She said.
As Randy stood nearby.
And I heard her say, well, how the f*** don't you know that?
If the detectives knew, they did not let that information slip.
So I told Kim, maybe they'll figure out. Well, she said, well, this is something that I think they needed to measure now. She said, because if they drove the car out of there, somebody moved that seat. And I thought, you're right.
Randy told me he was impressed with Kim's dogged demands for answers.
Kim was playing a pretty darn good detective when this was going on. She already had things in her mind and questions already, and I was thinking, hell, she's doing some pretty good legwork here herself.
South Ogden police went up to the water tank a third time that afternoon, with more dogs and more people. They scoured Spring Creek Canyon.
We searched and lo and behold, found the keys 50 yards from where it was at, just in the sagebrush.
Joyce's mail kept arriving at her apartment. No one was there to receive it. Her bills went unpaid. She owed money to the local newspaper for a classified ad, the one she had placed when selling her Oldsmobile. The man who had bought the car had paid Joyce with a check. Kim talked to the bank and learned the man had stopped payment after learning Joyce was missing. The bank also confirmed there had been no activity on Joyce's accounts after August 10th. By late September, Joyce's landlord told Kim and Randy they needed to cover her rent or clear out the apartment.
The power had gotten shut off. We didn't know that, so everything in the fridge had spoiled.
The Salazars did not have hundreds of dollars to spare. They arranged to move Joyce's things into storage.
When we had some manpower, to get the furniture and stuff out, we went back and we're moving all the furniture out.
Joyce's sister Dorothy came to help, along with Dorothy's daughter Kathy and Kathy's husband Paul, as well as some other extended family. First, they emptied Joyce's closet.
I think Joyce had more shoes than ZCMI's had on stock. And she had more dresses and more makeup.
They packed Dorothy's car full of Joyce's clothes. Dorothy and Kathy then departed with that payload. Paul stayed behind to help Randy break down Joyce's bed. South Ogden police had stripped the sheets weeks earlier, so the mattress was bare.
Both Paul and I lifted that up, and he was on one end and I was lifting my hand up on the other, and we had the mattress tilt like this, and we looked at it and we looked at each other and said, oh no. The whole bottom of the bed was all bloodstained.
The bloodstain was about a foot in diameter. It had 2 lobes, one of them appearing darker. The other lobe looked as if the blood had either wicked outward through the fabric or been diluted, say by wiping at it with a wet washcloth. Randy called to Kim, who was in the kitchen packing up her mother's dishes. she came into the bedroom and saw the mattress. Dorothy and her daughter Kathy arrived back at Joyce's apartment soon after. Randy and Paul showed them as well.
I had a bad feeling. I had a really, really bad feeling. And Paul had a bad feeling too. And we were both trying to convince Kathy and Kim. You know what? We don't know for sure that it's because of that. She could have had maybe a monthly or something in there, and you know what? We both knew that it was more blood than that.
Kim saw something more.
A matching stain on the box spring.
Suggesting the mattress had been flipped when the blood was still wet.
Then we started putting that washcloth together with the mattress.
Something terrible had happened in Joyce's bedroom.
I remember Kim crying and Kathy started screaming. They both started screaming.
So we called Brad again.
Brad Birch told them not to touch anything until he arrived. South Ogden police were likewise stunned at the discovery.
Oh, they were devastated. They were absolutely devastated that they missed something like that.
They were all looking at each other. You didn't turn the bed over. You didn't turn the bed over. And they all said to each other, no, we didn't turn the bed over.
Weeks later, the crime lab would confirm the blood from the washcloth and from the mattress shared the same type. Joyce's type, O.
I remember talking to him years down the road, and he said, we've never gone into another crime scene where we haven't flipped a mattress. Even if it wasn't warranted, we flip a mattress. That's what we do.
Blood on the mattress did not itself amount to evidence of a murder, but its discovery came at a critical juncture in the rape case. The Davis County Attorney's Office was pushing ahead with the prosecution, even in Joyce's absence. Judge Rodney Page scheduled a new trial for December 11th. Police dispatch in Ogden, Utah received a phone call toward the end of October of '85 from the owner of a pawn shop called The Gift House.
The Gift House has been serving the city of Ogden for almost 55 years, and friendly is an understatement.
Get yourself a cup of coffee and sit down and relax.
The Gift House occupied an orange brick building on the west end of Ogden's historic 25th Street.
Customers, friends, and family come to the Gift House often. They browse the store, socialize, and check in with the day's events.
It's kind of like a hub.
The owner, Scott Van Leeuwen, had worked in that storefront since 1961, before it even became a pawn shop. KSL-TV profiled Scott and the Gift House in this 2013 story.
But aside from its dedicated friends and customers, the store, like most pawn shops, has a little bit of everything.
Our business card says guns, gold, and diamonds. That pretty well says it all.
Even today, the Gift House's front windows advertise those three pillars of the business: guns, gold, and diamonds.
And guns especially gives the place character.
On that October day, a man identified in police records only as Scott asked dispatch to check a couple of serial numbers. They were from two guns, a .22 caliber lever-action Browning rifle and a 12-gauge Beretta shotgun. Both came back as stolen. They were among the pile of guns taken from the home of Cody Montgomery Sr. in the town of Liberty 6 months earlier. The guns Doug Lovell and his buddy Billy Jack had buried behind a cabin in the Deep Creek Mountains. Of course, police didn't know that last bit at the time. All they knew was someone at the Gift House had a lead on the stolen guns. The dispatcher sent an officer over to the pawn shop, but by the time he got there, no one seemed to know anything about the guns. Police reports say the officer questioned Scott, who told him the guns weren't there. He had only received a phone call about them himself. He didn't know who possessed them. The officer passed his report off to a detective who shared the information with the Weber County Sheriff's investigator handling the stolen guns case. And then, nothing. The trail went cold. South Ogden police didn't have much to go on by the time the 2-month anniversary of Joyce's disappearance arrived. They had her car, a bloody washcloth, and a blood-stained mattress.
The case is unlike any other missing person report South Ogden has ever handled. Usually cases like these are solved in a few weeks. This one has hung on 2 months.
Detective Sergeant Brad Birch went before TV news cameras.
With all leads exhausted and nowhere to turn, police are now trying a long shot, a psychic.
We have found in some of the research that we've done in some other states, they were able to locate items or locate missing persons or locate evidence located in areas that maybe the police hadn't been able to find any other way. And if these people were able to do something like that for us, that's what we'd be hoping for.
The reporter calling this a long shot was an understatement.
The psychics used personal items of Yost to try to get a feeling for the case. They examined this picture of her and her car keys. They also walked through her apartment to try to pick up any kind of lead on the case.
The most these psychics could say was they believed foul play was involved. Police weren't alone in seeking help from less traditional sources.
Kim found a lady that was doing, she was a reader.
Randy Salazar told me this reader claimed to be able to communicate with Joyce's spirit. Kim went to see the reader several times, spending about $30 a pop. Randy ended up confronting his wife, saying he didn't want to upset her.
But Kim, all that stuff that lady's telling you, I said, is in the paper and on the news every day, I said. She'd say, no, it isn't. I said, it is. I said, I said, I'm not saying she's fake, and, and she probably feels your mom or whatever. And I says, but, I'm not sure you ought to go to her anymore.
Were these psychics offering anything of value to either the police or to Joyce's family?
If it was your mom, if it was my mom, you know what, I'd be wanting to go too. I says, but I'm just telling you, everything you tell me, I hear on the news and I see in the paper.
No one who claimed to hear Joyce's voice on the ether was able to provide a location for her body. But Joyce's words would soon return to haunt Doug Lovell. Clearfield Police Detective Bill Holthouse and his team were tightening up their case. They had made contact with the owner of the Pier 3, who told them Doug Lovell had hung around the joint for days before Joyce Yost had showed up there with Lex Baier on the night of April 3rd.
As I understood it, he was a regular. He was there quite often.
Doug had been obsessing over a woman who worked at the pier named Sharon Guess.
Sharon Guess, yes.
Sharon told police Doug had hounded her. She had turned him down, saying company policy prohibited her from dating patrons. Every time Sharon had said no, Doug had grown more insistent. On the night of April 3rd, that insistence had turned to anger. He'd made a scene, storming out of the club. About 15 minutes later, somebody had called the pier and asked to speak with Sharon. It was Doug. He asked what time she got off work. She didn't feel comfortable telling him, so she just said, late. He suggested they grab something to eat when she was done. Sharon said no. She would prefer to just go home. Doug kept pressing until Sharon hung up on him. Sharon and the others who had been at the pier told police Doug had made passes on every woman there.
He actually pursued Joyce there that night.
Which contradicted what Joyce had told Bill just hours after the rape.
Do you remember seeing him at the Pier 3?
I do not.
I asked Bill if he could explain this discrepancy.
She actually didn't want to admit that, she shined him off.
Maybe it was embarrassment or fear of not being believed. Only Joyce knows. But this revelation helped explain why Joyce had described asking Doug, as he was preparing to rape her a second time, if he had been having relationship troubles.
I said to him, I said, do you have a phone? Do you want to talk to me? Can I help you at all? I thought, is he having a fight with his girlfriend or something? He started to say something about some girl, then he quit. And I don't know if he
Joyce had later revealed a tiny bit more of this conversation to her daughter Kim.
The one thing that my mom had told me was that he told her that she was taking Sharon's place.
Sharon told police she had been seeing a little red car with flip-up headlights following her around town in the weeks prior to the rape. Sometimes when headed home from work, she would see the car in the rear view and would go someplace other than home to prevent the driver from figuring out where she lived. This led prosecutor Brian Namba to wonder if Doug might have made a mistake. Perhaps he had believed he was following Sharon that night instead of Joyce.
It seems like to me that she was sort of similar in appearance. But it seems like to me like they were both blondes and both the same, similar age.
As police were piecing this together, Doug's defense attorney was busy preparing pretrial motions. John Hutchison sent a discovery demand to the prosecutors, asking for copies of all the reports and audio recordings made by police. Brian was not surprised.
I think that's typical of him, that he would do his homework.
John also told Judge Rodney Page he feared media coverage surrounding Joyce's disappearance might have already tainted the jury pool. He wanted Joyce treated as a Jane Doe during the trial.
Of course, John is worried that if enough evidence leaks out to the jury that they would conclude that she was dead, they hold that against his client in the rape case. So he was trying to keep those facts out of the jury's hearing.
Brian had his own concerns about the media coverage.
By then, I've had enough experience that I know that I don't want to create issues for appeal. So I'm interested in keeping that away from the jury, but I still have to go through with my trial.
Brian argued against the Jane Doe idea, but negotiated a compromise.
The judge would simply tell the jury that the victim was not available for trial today for reasons unrelated to this case, which turns out to not be true. But that was our stipulation in order to allow the jury to deliberate fairly on the rape issue.
Brian also notified Judge Page he intended to use Joyce's testimony from the preliminary hearing by having a proxy read it from the stand during the upcoming trial. This was, at the time, an untested tactic.
There is a rule of evidence that allows for it, but it's just really an unusual circumstance.
I'll try to explain this without getting too bogged down in legal jargon. Typically, you can't get on the witness stand and say, "Somebody else told me whatever," because that's what's known as hearsay. Utah's rules of evidence are clear. Hearsay is not admissible. Part of the reason for that is it's impossible to challenge a claim of what some other person supposedly said versus challenging the actual statement itself from the person who said it. And the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees Americans the right to confront their accusers. But there are exceptions. Under Utah law, if a witness is unavailable for a hearing or trial, it is allowable to use their prior statements so long as those statements were sworn and subjected to cross-examination. Like, for instance, when John Hutchison cross-examined Joyce during the preliminary hearing.
Doesn't violate the confrontation clause. And it's an exception to the hearsay rule because it's a sworn testimony.
Had Doug Lovell waived his right to a prelim, Joyce wouldn't have testified before vanishing, and the case against him would have been much more challenging to prove. Doug and Rhonda Lovell headed for the hills. They drove east, going up Ogden Canyon on Utah State Highway 39 into the Ogden Valley. They cruised past Pine View Reservoir and the small town of Huntsville, following the South Fork of the Ogden River. This was a drive Doug knew well. It was the route to his family's cabin. To get to the cabin, you had to turn off of the highway going west, just past the intersection that leads to Causey Reservoir on the east, onto a 10-mile-long dirt road that passed through locked gates. Doug and Rhonda were not going to the cabin on this particular drive in late 1985. Instead, they continued up the highway, winding past beaver ponds. Conifers and quaking aspen replaced the sagebrush as the curvy two-lane road ascended to an elevation of 9,000 feet above sea level, the crest of the Monte Cristo Mountains. Utah's Monte Cristo region is only accessible by car about 6 months out of the year. During the winter and spring, the 19-mile stretch of SR 39 crossing the range is buried under snow. In the autumn, though, Monte Cristo belongs to hunters. They fan out from the highway when the aspen forest turns vibrant shades of red, orange, and gold, stalking elk, moose, and mule deer.
Hang on just a second. I'm state game warden. Need to check your license.
On Saturday, October 19, 1985, KSL aired a news story about hunting enforcement efforts underway in the mountains of northern Utah.
Bill Woody looks like a hunter, and he acts like a hunter, and he's bagging prey just about as fast as he can.
Craig, it's an untagged deer. No go, buddy.
I can't say whether or not Doug saw this particular story, but the hunt was on his mind.
More manpower is what we need. More people out in the field doing the job, the same type of job, whether they're not working plain clothes or out working marked units. Both would do just as good.
Woody will be out all this deer season looking for violations, so fair warning.
Doug and Rhonda came to a stop at the side of the road. He opened the car door, and brisk air, rich with the scent of pine, rushed in. Then he stepped out and disappeared into the trees. Rhonda sat and waited. A Utah Division of Wildlife Resources officer, passing through the area on one of those many hunting enforcement patrols, saw her there and stopped to talk. Where was she headed? Was anyone else with her? Did she need any help? She was fine. She was alone. The wildlife officer could see nothing wrong, so he moseyed along. Doug returned after a time. He and Rhonda resumed their drive. A truck bearing the logo of the Utah Department of Natural Resources fell in behind them on the highway. The wildlife officer had returned. He now wanted to know, who was this man with Rhonda? The easy and honest answer, that Doug was her husband, was not the one she gave. She told the officer Doug was just a hitchhiker. Late autumn had arrived in Las Vegas. The lightest of rain sprinkled from clouds, keeping temperatures unseasonably cool. A Las Vegas Metro police officer headed down the Strip, the row of high-rise casino hotels along Las Vegas Boulevard. He had received word staff at the Aladdin had spotted a suspicious car parked in a lot east of the casino. It was the afternoon of November 11th, 1985. A layer of dust coated the maroon four-door Toyota Corolla. Spiders had taken up residence in its wheel wells. The front passenger window was rolled all the way down. The officer ran the car's plate. The Corolla had been reported missing out of Roy, Utah, on the outskirts of Ogden, a little over a month prior. So had its driver, a woman named Cherie Warren.
When Cherie Warren disappeared October 2nd, her friends and family believed then foul play was involved. They said Cherie wasn't the type to run away, that she had everything to live for.
The Aladdin Hotel's records showed Cherie had never stayed there. Las Vegas Metro Detective Robert Luke called Roy Police the following day and informed Detective Jack Bell, the lead investigator on Cherie's case, of the discovery.
It means that either she drove the car there herself or somebody stole the car from her, abducted her, and took the car there.
Roy Police had been searching for Cherie and her car for more than a month.
What we're asking for is just to locate where she may be, or any evidence to show that or indicate that there is maybe some foul play involved, so that we can do a different type of investigation rather than missing persons.
Cherie, a 25-year-old mother, had spent the past 9 months working for the Utah State Employees Credit Union at a branch near the corner of Harrison Boulevard and 42nd Street in Ogden. That was just 3/4 of a mile up the road from Joyce Yost's apartment. It was also, coincidentally, the place where Doug's wife Rhonda did her banking, and near the spot where Doug had met up with Tom Peters when trying to cash his workers' comp check in June of '85. Cherie had separated from her husband, Charles, the prior March, filed for divorce in May, and moved back in with her parents, who lived in Roy. They often cared for Charles and Cherie's 3-year-old son while each parent worked. Cherie had dated a few different men while separated, getting close with one by the name of Carrie Hartman. Carrie was 37, 12 years Cherie's senior, and worked as a plumber at Weber State University in Ogden. He also moonlighted at a telemarketing firm and had in the past served as a reserve officer for the Ogden Police Department. Cherie had excelled at her job. The credit union had tapped her to take part in a new training program run out of the head office in Salt Lake City. She had started that course on Monday, September 30th. A couple of days later, on the morning of Wednesday, October 2nd, she met with her estranged husband before work to hand off their son. Charles told Cherie he would be dropping his Toyota Supra off to have some work done at Wagstaff's, a dealership near the credit union head office in Salt Lake, later that afternoon. He wanted Cherie to pick him up and give him a ride back home to Ogden. She agreed. Charles would later tell police on that same afternoon he had called Cherie at work and told her he had changed his mind. He no longer needed a ride. But when Cherie left the office a couple of hours later, she told a fellow trainee named Richard she was headed to Wagstaff's to pick up her old man. She never made it.
Probably ought to have a description of the vehicle. We got it here. We got it.
Her distraught parents had worked with police to post flyers around town in the days and weeks following her disappearance. Police scrutiny had quickly focused on Charles, who'd reportedly been in a dispute with Cherie over alimony. Police records show he had refused to take a polygraph when pressed by a detective. The discovery of Cherie's car in Las Vegas more than a month later, though, made the case much more perplexing.
There was some indication in the asphalt that the car left imprints, so that would lead you to believe the car had probably been parked there when the weather was hotter.
Roy Police Detective Jack Bell asked Charles Warren to sign papers authorizing a search of the car, which he did.
Bell says the car's discovery now broadens the investigation to include transients passing through Salt Lake. He says any evidence found in the car will be run through a crime lab with the hope of learning who drove it to Las Vegas.
Las Vegas Metro Police Detective Robert Luke went to the Ewing Brothers tow yard on the north side of Vegas to search the Corolla on November 13th. The interior was filthy, likely due to the car having sat with the passenger window down for so long. The grime made it next to impossible to lift any fingerprints. The only set visible were on the driver door window. Luke found a pair of women's sunglasses and Cherie's checkbooks in the glove box, along with a pair of prescription medications. One belonged to Cherie, the other to Carrie Hartman. The car's trunk held some papers, a baby stroller, a bottle of face cream, a woman's suit jacket, and a set of sheets for a queen-size waterbed. No signs of a struggle, no clue as to where Cherie might be. Doug Lovell stepped out of the shower on the morning of Wednesday, December 11th, 1985, looking like a shadow of the man who had attacked Joyce Yost 8 months earlier. He had gone from a lean 155 pounds to a downright slim 130 on a diet of prescription pain pills. As he dressed himself for court, his wife Rhonda put her arm around him and said everything would be okay. Doug wasn't the only person unnerved that morning. Bill Holthouse felt it too.
It was the first time we prosecuted a rape case without a victim in the state of Utah. We're nervous.
The trial commenced with jury selection. This process, known to lawyers as voir dire, typically involves asking a pool of prospective jurors questions in open court. The prosecution and defense can then use challenges to whittle down the pool to just the number needed for the jury, in this case, 8. Doug's attorney, John Hutchison, wanted that done differently. He asked to do it individually in the judge's chambers. This way he, Judge Page, and prosecutor Brian Namba could see if any of the prospective jurors knew the story behind Joyce's disappearance without tipping off all the others.
There's no way to know whether they may have heard rumors,
Judge Page agreed. He told each person in the jury pool the accuser, Joyce Yost, was absent from the trial for reasons unrelated to the case. But he also said she had been missing for more than 2 months. The trial proper got underway once the jury was seated. The clerk read the charges, which had been consolidated to just 2: aggravated kidnapping and aggravated sexual assault. Now, aggravated sexual assault might not sound as severe as rape, but under Utah law, it is the more serious of the crimes because it involves the use or threat of a deadly weapon. Jan Schiller, the YWCA rape crisis counselor who had sat with Joyce in those first hours following the rape, was among the potential witnesses waiting outside the courtroom.
I was called as a potential witness to the trial, and it's 25. And the executive director and my mom insisted on being there with me. They're like, there's no way we're letting you go there by yourself.
Lex Baier, the man who Joyce had spent the evening with at the pier prior to the rape, took the stand first. Sharon Guess followed him, telling how she had been stalked by a man driving a red car with flip-up headlights. Brian was careful in how he talked about Joyce, Sharon, and the pier. This was due to advice he had received from Bill Holthouse.
Bill and I would talk over the case, and we'd talk about Sharon, and I'd call her a barmaid. And Bill would just hammer me and say, don't call her a barmaid. You call her a hostess, you have to treat her with some respect.
What he is getting at here is the possibility of bias, even if unintended, against drinkers among some Davis County residents.
In that kind of case in Davis County, you have to be careful that you don't lose the case because these people live a lifestyle that's different than your own.
Many people who live in the county are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, more commonly known as Mormons, who abstain from drinking alcohol. Joyce was not a member of that faith, nor was she a teetotaler.
Some people would say, well, there she was at a bar, out clubbing or whatever. That's why they have those places.
He educated me on this, there's life beyond being a Mormon and thinking that a bar is a horrible place. Regular people go to the pier.
They didn't want the jury casting judgment on Joyce for being at a club or for her own past work as a hostess.
The other aspect of that is that you don't want the judge to think that she's this hardened person who was less worthy of being protected because she lives that go to a drinking establishment kind of a lifestyle, that she's taking risks that should have been foreseen somehow.
But how was Brian supposed to show what kind of a person Joyce was if Joyce wasn't there herself to tell her story?
The danger of doing that kind of a case is that they blow off the testimony thinking, well, she didn't even think enough of it to come here herself. You know, we're not going to convict him on that.
So he moved to introduce Joyce's testimony from the preliminary hearing.
The defense attorney objected.
Judge Page mulled it over and said he would allow it.
John could see the handwriting on the wall and was just backpedaling and trying to figure out how he could minimize the damage.
Brian called a secretary from the county attorney's office to the stand to read Joyce's words.
My name is Marilee Gren, M-A-R-I-L-Y, and my last name is Gren, G-R-E-N.
Marilee was not an actress, unless you counted her having held a role in a high school play 25 years earlier. But Brian told me she had flair. They had talked through what the job would require.
You should be, fluent and clear without trying to be theatrical.
That was one thing Judge Page cautioned strongly, no theatrics. And I was just to, basically be neutral and read it. So I did.
And yet, a robotic reading of the transcript wouldn't be right either.
I mean, like when you tell me to say my name, that's how I said her name. It's not too thrilling. Your name, Joyce Yost.
Marilee also needed to convey the meaning behind Joyce's words.
And I thought she did the perfect balance.
Marilee's recitation impressed Bill Holthouse as well.
She was extremely professional. She read it just like Joyce had said it.
Marilee was 42 at the time of the trial, just a few years older than Joyce. She knew the details of the case, having heard conversation around the office. From the stand, in Joyce's place, she could see Doug sitting across the courtroom.
So I guess I did look at Doug Lovell.
During the prelim, Joyce had pointed to Doug from the stand and identified him as the man who had raped her. Marilee did the same.
That wouldn't have been dramatic. I could do that. Yeah.
Joyce's prelim testimony had included gut-wrenching descriptions of the initial assault in her car. Marilee read them verbatim. I asked her to do it again, 35 years later.
I tried to get out of my car, realizing I was definitely in a situation that my life was at stake. I just prayed for help, and as I was getting out of my car, I grabbed a hold of the horn and thought maybe if I honked the horn that one of my neighbors or somebody would hear. It didn't work. He became very angry.
She paused here, reflecting on this part of Joyce's experience.
Anger. He had a lot of anger. I had forgotten that, but I guess people like that do, don't they? Yeah, and it's not at her, I don't think. I think it's anger at something else. It's odd.
Marilee concluded her read of the prelim transcript, slipping in one last touch before leaving the stand.
I did get a sigh in there. So at the end, at one place, I remember.
Joyce's sister Dorothy Dial testified next, followed by South Ogden police officer Rob Carpenter. They described Joyce's immediate reaction to the rape, how she had handed over her dress, bra, pantyhose, and the blue men's button-up shirt. Then it was Bill's turn. John Hutchison went after Bill hard on cross-examination.
I had been on many cases with John, and he didn't let up at all. He knew how to push my buttons, but, and I had to keep my cool. I mean, he'd ask little off-the-cuff questions, just try to throw you off. He was good at it. He was a good attorney.
Court adjourned for the day. They took Thursday off, then returned on Friday, December 13th. The state's final witness, a forensics expert from the crime lab, talked the jury through the information from Joyce's rape kit. Brian rested his case. To her relief, Jan Schiller, the rape victim advocate, had not needed to testify.
They had a strong enough case without me, and I don't know that I could have added much to what the detective would have said.
Jan told me Joyce, even though she had not been there, had been heard.
Obviously, Joyce could be a voice for herself. She was really, really wonderful.
John Hutchison next launched his defense. John called only a few witnesses. The bulk of his case sat on Doug himself. Under oath, Doug insisted he had not raped Joyce. Her family sat listening, incredulous.
And everything that he got up and said, come on, you can see you're full of crap.
Bill Holthouse had heard this story before.
It was pretty much word for word what was in my initial police report.
With some added flavor.
He was just, it wasn't a big deal to him.
To hear Doug's telling of it, Joyce had flirted with him.
And when he testified, I remember women saying, man, that guy thinks he's got gift of women.
He was quite the cad. Separated from his wife, chasing women around. And he just struck me as a guy who didn't respect women very much.
Doug shed tears on the stand, saying, I did not physically harm her. Doug said Joyce had gone willingly with him in the Mazda to his house. He insisted she had been wearing her own dress, not his shirt, when he had later taken her home. Bill's own personal opinion of Doug crystallized in that moment.
I'll tell you what it struck me as, at the time, can't prove it, struck me he'd done it before. I mean, this was not a one-off thing. This was just a casual thing, not the first woman that he influenced, or pushed to do something like that.
The defense rested. Judge Page gave the jury their instructions. Closing arguments followed, and the jurors headed off to deliberate at 2:20 p.m. Brian Namba felt optimistic.
You get some momentum and you feel pretty good, but on the other hand, there's always have some reason to worry that some people may be offended or just on the principle that we don't have the victim here. She really didn't say anything that could result in a not guilty.
He received word the jury had reached a verdict just 1 hour later.
But when the jury came back quickly, I assumed that was a good sign.
Merrily, who had read Joyce's testimony from the stand, was in the hallway of the courthouse as John Hutchison swept past.
I stepped out of the county attorney's office to get a drink at the drinking fountain, and he was coming back with Douglas Lovell, and he was telling Doug, it's not good when they come back so quick. And I remember bending over the fountain thinking, yes.
The jury found Doug guilty on both counts. Judge Page ordered the bailiff to take him into custody pending sentencing. This time, there would be no bail, no accidental early release. Bill Holthouse and Brian Namba both told me they believed Joyce's testimony and Merrili's read of it were pivotal in securing the conviction.
You have to engage the jury so that they feel her presence. And I think she really accomplished that.
We had all the evidence, but this had never happened before in Utah. You've got to have something that ties that evidence together, and her testimony tied it together.
Joyce's family gathered in the foyer outside the courtroom.
I wanted to wait until I actually saw them bring him out of the courtroom.
A pair of deputies escorted Doug, in shackles, down the hallway, right past where Kim and Randy Salazar were waiting.
He had like a smirk on his face, like he didn't give a shit. that he was just found guilty of that. So the closer he came, I mean, we were making pretty good eye contact, me and him, and I looked at him and I said, "You motherfucker." And he stopped right there in his tracks. And he looked at me and he said, "She's gone, buddy. She's gone. You'll never find her."
The two deputies dragged their prisoner past, while Kim and Randy rushed to tell Brad Birch what had happened.
But I thought, we got him now because he's pissed. He's boiling over. The one thing that he thought he could get away with if she wasn't there was this rape.
The detective went to question Doug about his comment.
He still wouldn't talk.
Any little flame Joyce's loved ones had been protecting, clinging to the idea she might still be alive, flickered out.
We all wanted to hold out hope that she was somehow still alive. And to me, that was like the point when those words out of Lovell's mouth to Randy when he was pissed off outside the courtroom was when we basically knew she was gone.
Joyce's son, Greg Roberts, had not been in the courthouse himself that day. He was still in Virginia, attending dental school.
Well, I was just so distraught. I didn't know, if I should move home.
Greg's classes went on break for Christmas, and he decided to drive home to Utah. The more than 2,000-mile journey left him ample time to think.
I called my dad, and I just said, "Dad, I think I want to move home, so I can help."
Mel Roberts, Joyce's first husband, encouraged his son to stay the course.
It was a hard decision for him, and it was even hard for me to tell him, "Don't quit school."
Mel told Greg his mother would not have wanted him to give up on his dream.
If he'd have said, "Well, if that's how you feel," I probably would have left school and just moved back.
And that would have been tragic.
That Christmas at home forced Greg to reflect on the 2 years he had spent living with his mom while in college, sharing the very apartment from which she had vanished.
Which always made me feel guilty because I feel like I left her unprotected.
Gone were the decorations, and the piles of presents spread so far out from under the Christmas tree one could hardly find a place to stand. There were no boisterous dinners with Aunt Dot, no long hours of laughter between the two sisters.
Joyce was the glue of this family. Everybody's been pretty lost since she's been gone.
Greg told his sister Kim he was thinking of staying, of not returning to dental school.
I said, "No, I will make sure you know everything, every day, as it happens. If something happens, I'll make sure you know."
So after the holiday, Greg made the long drive back to Virginia, where he would wait for word about the sentence soon to come for Doug Lovell. If you or someone you know has endured rape, sexual assault, or sexual abuse of any kind, help is available. In the United States, you can call 1-800-656-HOPE or visit rainn.org to connect with free resources through the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. No one needs suffer in silence. You are not alone. If you haven't already, please subscribe to or follow Cold to make sure you get every episode. You can also interact with me and the Cold team on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Cold Podcast. Cold is researched and written by Dave Cawley, with editorial oversight by executive producer Cheryl Worsley. Additional executive producers include Paul Anderson, Nick Piniella, and Andrew Greenwood. Audio production by Nina Ernest. Mixing by Trent Sell. Michael Bonmiller composed the main score. Special thanks to the team at Amazon Music. Full credits for each episode are available at thecoldpodcast.com. Cold is an Amazon original by KSL Podcasts in association with Workhouse Media. Thank you for listening.